Aegon the Conqueror had two wives, Visenya, his oldest sister, and Rhaenys, his youngest sister. And as readers, we know quite a bit about Aegon's relationships with each of these women. We know that Aegon was a lot more affectionate toward his youngest sister wife, Rhaenys, mainly because Rhaenys was a lot more playful and charismatic than Visenya, enjoying more feminine activities such as music, dancing, and poetry. In Fire and Blood, it is said that Aegon enjoyed Rhaenys' company far more than Visenya's, spending 10 nights with Rhaenys for every night that he spent with Visenya. This is probably because of the fact that Visenya was a lot more serious and stern in nature, more comfortable in ringmail and with a sword than she was in a dress. Visenya was no laughing maid, but rather a skilled warrior who spent more time training swords with Aegon than making love to him. Her relationship with her brother was clearly a lot different than his relationship with Rhaenys was. However, although we understand the dynamics of Aegon's relationships with each of his sisters, we don't know much about the relationship that Visenya had with Rhaenys. We know that Aegon, although he was a commanding and strong king on the battlefield, did not frequently sit on the small council and rule the kingdoms on a daily basis. Rather, he left that task to both Rhaenys and Visenya, who proved to be far more capable of governing the kingdom's day-to-day affairs. We also know that Aegon's rule was prosperous and mostly peaceful, which would insinuate that Visenya and Rhaenys worked pretty well with one another. It insinuates that they definitely shared the same purpose of conquering Westeros, and that they mostly agreed on the best strategies that should be implemented to maintain that power across the realm. In Fire and Blood, it is said that they both took great delight in arranging political marriages and sealing peace deals between ancient houses that were in enmity with one another. Throughout Aegon's reign, these alliances were successful, and Visenya and Rhaenys proved themselves to be capable diplomats and politicians. They were obviously a great team when they were working together politically. Perhaps by looking at how well they worked with one another, one could come to the conclusion that Visenya and Rhaenys deeply respected one another. Visenya probably realized that Rhaenys, because of her personality, was more of a charmer and diplomat than she was, and so she probably let her take the lead in matters concerning diplomacy. And Rhaenys also probably respected the fact that Visenya was more martial and disciplined as a warrior, especially given the fact that they were trying to establish peace after such a bloody conquest. She probably learned to put her trust in Visenya's military knowledge and her stern approach when it came to dealing with some of these lords. Westeros is, after all, a very war-driven and militaristic society, where knights are praised and battles are immortalized in songs and poems. The Westerosi are therefore very hard and brutal in nature, and the lords here thirst for war and an opportunity to cover themselves in glory on the battlefield. Ruling them is not an easy thing to do. Therefore, a skilled and respected warrior like Visenya is valuable to have in the room when you're trying to deal with people like this, negotiating peace, but also trying to keep them in line. Visenya probably appreciated that whenever she and Visenya were sent on diplomatic missions. My point is, these two women had complementary strengths, and most likely a mutual respect for one another for the roles that they each played during the conquest. They most likely deeply respected one another and probably even grew fond of each other over time. Or maybe they didn't. The fact that Visenya and Rhaenys worked very well with one another insinuates that they had a great relationship professionally as politicians, but perhaps that did not translate into a positive relationship on a personal level. After all, there was plenty for Visenya, specifically, to dislike and even be envious of when it came to Rhaenys and her relationship with Aegon. As I said before, Aegon spent more time with Rhaenys than he did with Visenya, preferring her company and affection rather than Visenya's stern nature and strictness. This is something that might have made Visenya feel unwanted or isolated, maybe even insecure and envious of Rhaenys. After all, Visenya was the eldest sister, and duty should have made Aegon focus on her more, trying for her attention and siring children from her. But instead, the Conqueror preferred Rhaenys' company, and he even named his son with her his heir over his son with Visenya. It's most likely that Aegon's preference for Rhaenys might have fostered envy and animosity between her and Visenya. It would be understandable if that were the case. In fact, Rhaenys was not just beloved by Aegon, but she was also beloved by almost everyone throughout the realm. People just liked Rhaenys more because she was more playful and feminine, enjoying music, dancing, and poetry like a proper lady. She filled the court with singers and mummers and puppeteers, so she was obviously more fun and charming than Visenya was. On the other hand, Visenya was feared, not loved. People were afraid of Visenya and thought that she was dark, maybe even evil. There were rumors that she spent her time dabbling in dark magic and playing with poisons, so people were more afraid of her and with being in her company. This probably isolated Visenya and made her feel ostracized or unwanted. People were just more receptive towards Rhaenys and enjoyed her company more. So that probably stung Visenya and made her feel bad. We all want to be loved and wanted to some degree, after all. And who's to say that Visenya and Rhaenys necessarily saw eye to eye when it came to their political approaches? As I said before, Visenya was more militaristic than Rhaenys, so she probably had a harsher and more ruthless political approach than Rhaenys. Rhaenys was charming and more inclined to a diplomatic approach, so perhaps she butted heads with Visenya a couple of times. Looking at how bloody and brutal Maegor's rule was gives us some insight into the ruthless influence of Visenya's political style. She was, after all, Maegor's mother and top advisor, so we can insinuate her political approach through how ruthless Maegor was. By the time of Maegor's rule, Aegon and Rhaenys were out of the picture, and only Visenya had the king's ear and ultimate influence on the realm's affairs. So it's not too far-fetched to think that Visenya and Rhaenys' styles of ruling were very different from each other, and that they probably butted heads about how to approach diplomatic missions and policies. Did that sort of disagreement make them dislike each other even more? What do you think about the relationship between Visenya and Rhaenys? Do you think that they loved each other and cared for one another deeply, or do you think that they disliked each other and were probably even envious of one another? Let me know down below in the comments section. If you liked this video, click the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more content. To buy the books, there is a link in the description box. But thank you for watching this video. Peace.